You're here with the AntiFans. This week on Fantasy Footnotes, we're going to be talking about the top 10 rookies for fantasy in terms of redraft leagues and the top 20 in terms of dynasty leagues.
Yep, that's what we're doing.
All right, can't start any conversation about this year's rookie class without talking about Ezekiel Elliott. He is pretty unanimously the number one rookie to own for redraft. Most of the early projections even have him going high in the first round of redraft leagues. What are your thoughts?
I think he's incredible. Probably being overrated, but definitely the guy to own for redraft, obviously, and dynasty especially.
Yeah, you have the best rookie running back in the class going to a great situation, good offense, good offensive line. The real challenge is if Tony Romo goes down, does that hurt his value? He's also got Alfred Morris and Darren McFadden, both pretty capable running back mates there with him in Dallas. Those are the only things I can really see detracting from Ezekiel Elliott's value this year. That being said, I think he's on a tier all on his own in terms of rookies this year. After Ezekiel Elliott, it becomes pretty muddled. A lot of varying opinions about who's best after that. Who do you got number two?
Pretty tough. Had to really think about it. Wanted to do a receiver probably for this. I went with Corey Coleman, number two. I like his speed. I like the situation a little bit. So
I'm not as big a fan of the situation. Robert Griffin III has never produced even decent fantasy receiver in the years he was starting with Washington. I've got Laquan Treadwell, number two. Coleman, I've got him number three. Where do you got Treadwell?
But just on Coleman, I think that obviously RG3 isn't great. Had a lot of bad times the past couple years, but Cleveland wanted to grab him. They drafted 5 receivers. Seems like they're kind of dead set in making somebody catch on there. So that's what I'm doing with that. Back to Treadwell, got him 3.
Yeah, Treadwell, I think he steps in, has a really good shot to be the Vikings' number one option. Seems like Teddy Bridgewater has a new favorite rookie receiver every year. This year, Treadwell could easily be that guy. Last year, Stephon Diggs. The year before that, Charles Johnson. Bridgewater, decent young quarterback. He's not gonna be elite. Probably Treadwell probably not going to be elite as a result. His speed also a big concern for me.
Yeah, I mean he's not elite. He doesn't have great speed. Got nice size, but I mean, who are you in love with? Like Diggs? Not really. No one saw that coming. No one saw Charles Johnson coming 2 years ago.
Right.
You could have thought about Mike Wallace in the times in the past, but that's like whatever. I mean, he's got a good shot as anybody.
Yeah, Treadwell probably low-end wide receiver 2, probably a better flex consideration at best.
Yeah.
That's the high side. Corey Coleman probably has the higher upside. What's happening with Josh Gordon there, that could easily hurt his value if Gordon plays. Those two guys, I have them quite a bit ahead of the next receivers when it comes to redraft rankings. Got a couple of running backs next on my list. Who do you got next?
I'm going running backs. I'm looking at, it was a tough call. There's like kind of a grouping here of guys that are maybe going to win the job outright, potentially be second. It's kind of hard to pick between them. I got Kenyon Drake next. I sort of wish his measurables were better in either way in terms of like speed or size, but the situation there, they're desperate for a running back. Jay Ajayi is decent, but they don't seem to love him. So I think he's going to get all opportunities to make it work there.
Yeah, Jay Ajayi, also a little bit undersized. If he is going to be undersized, you'd like him to be a little quicker. So I would say him and Kenyon Drake, it's going to be an interesting battle. Probably nobody emerges as a clear number one. The NFL today, there's not many teams that have a workhorse running back. I don't think any of the guys left on this list outside of Elliott have that chance to be a workhorse this year. I've got CJ Procise, number 4, going to Seattle. Thomas Rawls didn't stay healthy when he got the opportunity last year. He looked really good in short spurts, but hasn't shown it consistently over a whole season. I don't think he's got a firm handle on that job. CJ Procise, receiver converted to running back, so he has the receiving skills out of the backfield, got good size and speed. I think he's got the measurables to be a number one lead back in this league, unlike Drake, who I think is probably more of a situational running back, split time as a kind of top side of his upside.
Yeah, I can't disagree wildly. I got Precise next, 5th. I really like him a lot. That situation, the line isn't ideal, but like Rawls isn't ideal. People have definitely really came to play and like just blown up next to Russell Wilson. Like he can like accommodate a good running game. That's like a nice situation there in terms of that. Yeah. What do you have, 5th?
Next, I've got Jordan Howard going to Chicago. Again, just like Thomas Rawls, Jeremy Langford showed some brief stretches where he really looked good last year when Matt Forte went down. But as soon as Forte was healthy, kind of got more into a mixed backfield. Forte outscoring him at that point. I think, what I'm hearing from Chicago, they really like Jordan Howard and could see him being the lead back. To get a rookie running back who in a redraft league has a good chance at being a number one back. Obviously, huge value in anybody who's a lead back in a redraft league. I like Jordan Howard's chances to potentially win that job.
Yep, I got Howard at 6 as well. Like all the things you just touched on. After that, got a Devontae Booker sighting. Denver, I mean, it's just all the opportunity in the world. They are clearly going to lean on that running game. Not a lot in the throwing department. Never liked C.J. Anderson. I like Ronnie Hillman a little bit, but they don't seem to like him. What's this, like a high fifth round pick on Booker? 136.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm into it at 7. What do you have next?
I'm going Michael Thomas at number 6 on my list. Like him better for redraft purposes than dynasty purposes. I think there's an immediate need for a big receiver in New Orleans after they cut Marquise Colston. Breeze and Colston have been great together for years. I think Michael Thomas can step into that role. He's got the pedigree coming from Ohio State to step in and have a good rookie year. I could see him getting in the 8 touchdown range, 8 or 900 yards.
Yeah, that's a great call. I found myself forgetting Michael Thomas, probably because his name is so boring. It's like just anybody else in any wake of life. For redraft, that's a fantastic call. Kind of jealous. Next, I had Paul Perkins. It's kind of the same argument for a lot of these guys we got here in the middle. I don't love the redraft take on this draft, so I'm going Perkins there. Yeah.
I've got Keith Marshall next. Again, we're going running backs who have a chance of winning that job. Matt Jones last year, again, looked good at times, but can't hang on to the football. You're not going to start in the NFL if you can't hang on to the football. I think Keith Marshall has the chance to win that job. I really like his size and speed. Who couldn't? 219 pounds, 4.31, off the charts measurables. Came into Georgia as a 5-star recruit. Even split time with Todd Gurley. Gurley wasn't, when they were both freshmen at Georgia, the clear number one to Keith Marshall. Had the injuries, which set him back. Couldn't even crack the rotation last year at Georgia. So obviously it's been a while since he was that good. But the injuries kept him off the field and limited his touches in college. So maybe he's a guy who flashes in the NFL, doesn't have a lot of miles on the tires coming in.
Yeah, I love Keith Marshall. He's like maybe my second favorite player in this draft. I'm I can't imagine I'll walk away from a dynasty draft without trying really hard to acquire him. I remember after learning it was measurables from a text message from you, and my response was just like, wow, that's incredible. And I have him next as well, at 9.
Next up, I've got Derrick Henry. I really like Derrick Henry's skills. I liked him coming into the draft. Ends up with the Tennessee Titans. Haven't had a good history recently with running back success. He's going to be behind DeMarco Murray to begin with, so not an ideal setup for Derrick Henry. But he's got the skills. He's an injury away from having that job. I think he could have some value. Maybe get 10 to 12 carries even when DeMarco Murray is healthy, and then if DeMarco Murray misses any time, be a guy that you really want to start.
DeMarco Murray is going to hate Derrick Henry. I think he was excited to go to Tennessee, find a new situation, a new lease on life. He thought he had it in Philly. And then they don't even care. And they just grab Derrick Henry, probably like one of the most elite athletes at running back in the draft. I have him at 11th. Had to cut him off just barely on this. I know you don't necessarily agree with this, but I got Josh Doxson at 10. I feel like he's got that size. Not the best size, but enough of it. Kirk Cousins is coming to his own. You can't rely on any of the other receivers there. They're like in love with the tight end. Like Jordan Reed's like being overrated by everyone in the world right now. So there's like definitely a possibility that Doxson is very much worth grabbing late.
Yeah, on Doxson, I've got him just outside of the top 10 for redraft purposes. He didn't make my list. I think Deshaun Jackson's capable. I think Pierre Garçon is capable. Usually if you have capable established receivers, rookie receivers don't get enough volume to be worthwhile in redraft fantasy leagues. Kirk Cousins doesn't do it for me. I don't think he's going to be able to keep 3 receivers relevant, let alone probably 2. So Doxson falls off my top 10 for redraft purposes.
Would it shock you, though, if Pierre Garçon didn't show up?
I wouldn't be shocked if all 3 of those guys were a guy that you never wanted to start all year. I think all 3 of them cannibalize each other's production. I think sometimes with a mediocre quarterback like Kirk Cousins and 3 receivers that kind of cancel each other out, it just is a situation I'd prefer to avoid. If you could snag Josh Doxson late as a flyer, sure, but I think he's going to go a little higher than that because he went in the first round. I'm avoiding him.
Yeah, 10-team standard, I'd probably avoid him too, but incredibly deep leagues, think about it.
Yeah. Rounding out my top 10, I've got Will Fuller. I love the speed. I love the size. I really like his highlights out of Notre Dame. I think he would have been my number 1 receiver, but he went to Houston, and DeAndre Hopkins is a target monster. I don't see him getting enough work there to take him really high. But he's a deep threat. He's going to have some games where he gets you 16 points, on 2 catches. But not enough volume to be consistent. I like a consistent receiver, especially with a rookie, somebody who's, again, going to get a lot of targets. I think Corey Coleman, I think Laquan Treadwell, I think both those guys are much more poised, as well as Michael Thomas, to get high volume workloads as a rookie. And then rounding out my top 10, I've got Kenyon Drake, who you've already touched upon much earlier. I think he's got a chance to get a good workload in Miami. I do like Jay Ajayi. That's why I don't have Kenyon Drake higher. I think he'll probably get the first crack at the starting job if he gets injured, which, what running back goes through a season in this new world of concussions without missing some time. I think Drake will have a few good games.
Yep. That's your views on Drake. Should we jump to Dynasty?
Yeah, so that wraps up the redraft. If you only play redraft leagues, probably no point in continuing on. But if you are like us and you are more into the Dynasty fantasy football leagues, let's get started. I think the same guy that started the redraft is the same guy that's probably going to start everybody's Dynasty draft. Probably the number 1 pick in every rookie Dynasty draft out there, Ezekiel Elliott. hands down. We already talked about why, and I think nothing else needs to be said.
Yeah, no brainer. Zeke.
All right, number 2. Again, where it gets interesting. I've got CJ Procise. I had him number 4 on my redraft list. I've got him number 2 on my overall list. Again, I think he's got all the tools, the size, the speed, the pass catching ability to be an every down back in the NFL. I think he's got work to do on his pass protection, having converted from a receiver, but I like his chances at being a number 1 on, again, an offense like you touched upon in Seattle, where they're going to score a lot of points. Russell Wilson draws a lot of attention, so the running backs get to do work. Obviously, Marshawn Lynch had huge success there for a lot of time. Got Procise number 2.
Yeah. CJ, 2K, 16. Number 2 here, it's a little repetitive. I got Corey Coleman, too. Still like him for all the same reasons in redraft. Like him more in Dynasty because he could just develop, maybe get some rapport. Maybe he has like a Baylor Brotherhood combination with RG3.
And, yeah, both of them went to Baylor, never there together, but...
Yeah, but, going green.
Yeah.
Staying true.
Could have the connection. I've got my first receiver off the board at number 3 in a Dynasty draft. If I was making every pick, that would be Laquan Treadwell. Had him number 1 receiver in redraft purposes. Got him number 1 in Dynasty purposes. I think he can develop with Teddy Bridgewater and be the number 1 receiver that Bridgewater hasn't had. Again, he's had a number 1 receiver was different in his first and second year. Nobody's really stood out and grabbed a hold of that job. I think Treadwell has the chance to do that.
Yeah, did it all that. Treadwell's 3 for me. I'm going to go, well, let's see. You just did 3. Yeah, so 4. This is where Derrick Henry actually makes my list. I'm not going to cut him off there like with redraft. I just like him a lot. He's a big old dude who has some nice speed, and DeMarco Murray's not going to be around forever. He's not the most consistently healthy dude around either. Yeah, so I gotta slot him in. Gotta get him there.
Yeah, Derrick Henry, his size is not ideal for an NFL running back. He's bigger than just about anybody who's had much success. Brandon Jacobs is the only person that comes to mind who had success at that size, and it wasn't very sustainable. I've got Derrick Henry a bit lower because of that. I got Corey Coleman, who you had number 2. I've got him slotting in at number 4. I love the speed. Only really runs 2 routes, but if you can blow by a guy, as Mike Wallace was doing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, catch a bomb, that's big for fantasy. So I think he's got that potential. RG3, for all of his flaws, he does have a decent arm, so could be some long connections with Coleman. I could foresee that.
And also, even if RG3 is a pile of junk, Cody Kessler maybe steps in there, does a little something. Neither one of those are great quarterbacks, so the fact that Coleman can't run a bunch of routes, they're just like low skills, but just like repeat the process over and over. What else are they going to do?
All right. Next up, I've got Keith Marshall.
I got Keith Marshall next.
Number 5 on both of our lists. Both of us love him. You probably won't see him on too many draft lists this offseason, but I really like him. I really think there's an opportunity in Washington, and I think he's got a good chance of taking a hold of it.
So, 6, Kenyon Drake. I think he's great. I think he will win that job from Jay Ajayi.
I've got Jordan Howard coming up next. Chicago's, had a good running situation. Matt Forte's had a lot of good years there. He's obviously not there anymore. There's an opportunity. I don't know that Jeremy Langford takes hold of it. I think Jordan Howard has just as good of a shot, if not maybe a little bit better, of taking that job than Jeremy Langford. Langford looked really good in pass-catching situations. Not so great running between the tackles. I think Jordan Howard has a chance to really make a fantasy impact this year and going forward for dynasty purposes.
Yeah, and he's just like another one of those guys that there's not the most consistent player ahead of him. And if you're grabbing somebody in like the second or third round of your dynasty draft. Maybe you can get in the second, I guess, on some of these guys. Definitely worth the risk.
All right. Next up, I've got Derrick Henry. You had already you'd had him number 4.
Yep.
Again, I like DeMarco Murray. I've been a fan of DeMarco Murray a long time. Can't really raise up Derrick Henry without lowering DeMarco Murray. So I think for dynasty purposes, maybe 2-3 years down the road, DeMarco Murray getting older, not going to be there. But for the next 2 or 3 years, I think DeMarco Murray hangs on to the starting role there. Again, not ideal size for a running back. He's a little bit tall. He's a little bit big. Maybe he breaks the mold. More than likely, I think he's easy to tackle at that size. More of a short yardage guy. Probably gets a decent amount of touchdowns, but I don't see him as being, heavy volume carries player.
All right, so that's rounding out my top 10. It's a lot of these same guys we've kind of touched on already. I got Pro Size 7. We've discussed him multiple times with higher on your list. I have Howard 8, which was pretty close to what you had him there, maybe a little higher. 9, looking at Devontae Booker. Same reasons I liked him earlier. 10, first appearance of one Will Fuller on either of my lists. I kind of feel like I would have loved him a lot if he would have gone somewhere else. Brock Osweiler doesn't do it for me. He's really tall. That's great. A lot of other Texans I see grabbing balls before Fuller. Who do you got rounding out your top 10?
I've got Will Fuller, Kenyon Drake, and Josh Doxson rounding out the top 10. You had Doxson in your top 10 for redraft. I had him outside, but for dynasty purposes, I like him. Kirk Cousins is a fairly young quarterback. I think him and Doxson can develop some chemistry. I don't see him as having big potential for redraft purposes, but I think for dynasty purposes, he probably sits on your bench this year. And then you see him as a decent flex option maybe 2 to 3 years down the road.
Yep, I got Doxson next year too. I like him.
All right, so we're going a bit deeper on the redraft, or the dynasty, than we did on the redraft. We stopped at 10. We're going to 20. My next 5, I've got Sterling Shepard, Devontae Booker, Michael Thomas, Wendell Smallwood.
Some really similar things here. I'm looking at Doxson we just touched on was 11. Going to go Sterling Shepard as well. That guy is incredibly strong, incredibly small, and I think Eli Manning's good enough to have a couple of relevant receivers. Shepard could definitely grab that number 2 spot. After Odell Beckham Jr., like, what are you in love with there?
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing.
If I could count, I would also have Daniel Lasco in my next 5. Let's see. We haven't talked about Sterling Shepard. You had talked about him a little bit, but we didn't talk about him in our previous list. I like him out of the slot. I think Eli's a good enough quarterback, like you said, to have a couple of useful fantasy pieces on that offense. I like the hire of, or I guess the promotion of McAdoo to head coach there. I think that helps the offense with the West Coast style that he runs. All right. Devontae Booker, Michael Thomas, we had talked about. Wendell Smallwood. Ryan Matthews is injury prone. He's the lead back in Philly now. Darren Sproles, I don't really see him as an every down back. So if Matthews were to get injured, Wendell Smallwood, unfortunate name, but a fortunate situation for him. I think he's got a chance to get some carries.
Maybe the worst name in the draft. But yeah, I have Wendell Smallwood at 15th. I don't like Ryan Matthews. No one likes Ryan Matthews. Eagles didn't like Ryan Matthews enough last year to give him the job, even though they considered it at times. Chip Kelly's gone. So
yeah, Peterson,
I don't know if they even want Matthews there.
Peterson's an interesting guy when it comes to running backs. He's coming over from Kansas City. Everybody who played for Kansas City last year was good. Obviously Jamal Charles, but then you had Charkandrick West, you had Spencer Ware. Everybody that was the next man up seemed to run well behind the system that Peterson was running. I'm sure he's learned a lot from Andy Reid. Reid's had numerous productive backs in his career. I think Peterson might be, one of those coaches you like whatever running back he's thrown out there.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
And then I had Daniel Lasco that we haven't talked about yet. I think he could be a good gadget player for the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, they've got Ingram, so he's not going to be a guy who gets the first and second down carries. But Sean Payton's a guy who, runs a lot of running backs out there, gets creative with how he runs the offense. I think there could be a role for Lasco even this year where he has a few productive fantasy games, and I think he could get incorporated more into the offense as the years go by, and maybe be similar to a Darren Sproles type of guy in that offense.
Yeah, I love that role. That's really interesting to think about. Michael Thomas finally makes one of my lists. I remembered him, even with that name. Got him here at 16. After that, I'm going to get away from running backs and wide receivers. I think for the first time on any of these lists.
Yeah, I've got my first non-running back receiver sliding in at number 17 as well.
Same.
I got Paul Perkins, then Carson Wentz, Jarrell Adams as my next three. Paul Perkins, we had talked about him a little bit. The Giants, nobody's got a firm hold on that job, so why not Paul Perkins? Don't love the talent, but he's there. He's got an opportunity. Carson Wentz, I really like Carson Wentz. I think he's got ideal size. I think he's going to add some value, probably 400 to 500 yards minimum running the football. He's a guy who can take some hits at that size, and I think, the new ideal fantasy quarterback, a la Cam Newton, is somebody who can score some touchdowns on the ground, get you some yards, get you some extra points. Even Russell Wilson, other guys making that work to be top 10, if not even top 5 fantasy quarterbacks.
Yeah, Philly, they've cleaned out a lot of their really elite skill players. They have like Nelson Aguilar, who did nothing last year, Jordan Matthews, who did nothing last year, Ryan Matthews, and then the ill-named Wendell Smallwood there. So Wentz makes me a little nervous. I have him 20th overall, so a little lower than you. At 17 and 18, I was a little torn. I got a little tight end sandwich here. I've got Darrell Adams, who was drafted quite a bit lower than Hunter Henry, but Adams, just looking at all his measurables, I just can't get enough of that. I think in 2 or 3 years, like potentially 2 years, I suppose, Eli Manning's still going to be there. He's produced relevant fantasy tight ends in the past. I like the possibility of that.
Yeah, I've got Darrell Adams right behind Carson Wentz for a lot of the reasons that you just said. I really like the measurables. I really like the opportunity. I like Eli Manning as a guy that can produce decent fantasy options at the tight end position. I see him as somebody who could even sneak into maybe the bottom of the top 10 this year, and a guy you definitely are probably drafting next year or the year after as a starting fantasy tight end.
Yeah, starting next year, that's what it's all about. Rookie tight ends, not what it's all about. I got Goff, 19, and then 20 was Wentz. So differ a little bit there, but that's how I rounded up.
All tight ends and quarterbacks on the bottom of your list.
Just shoved them down there. Didn't want to think about it.
I got Devin Johnson from We Are Marshall coming up next. Undrafted free agent, the first undrafted free agent on either of our lists. I like the size. I like the speed. I don't like Jonathan Stewart's chances to stay healthy 2 seasons in a row. I think he's got a chance to, edge out Cameron Artis-Payne for the number 2 running back spot there and have a chance at some work as an undrafted free agent. And then I've got Tyler Urban, who also went to Houston, going at the end of my top 20. Don't love the size at 192 pounds. He's not big enough to be an every down back, but another guy who maybe sees some value as like a Lance Dunbar type, just catching passes. In a PPR league, he's somebody you might want to think about going a little higher with as a dynasty piece.
All right, that wraps up the lists.
Now, well, we're going to go deep a little bit. So again, if you if you're a pretty shallow fantasy football player, you play dynasty, but you're not going really deep with it, shut it off. But we got some more names. Got a couple names that he had put on his list. I didn't get quite into my top 20, but Jared Goff, Hunter Henry, some guys I like. Kenneth Dixon, a guy that neither of us have mentioned. He went to Baltimore. There's nobody with a firm handle on that job. He's got a chance to earn some playing time this year. Going really deep, Darius Jackson. Darius Jackson, the 216th overall pick, goes to Dallas. Everybody's talking about Ezekiel Elliott with good reason, but Darius Jackson has got maybe even better measurables than Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think he's a better football player, but somebody who might catch on there, has a chance to edge out Alfred Morris and Darren McFadden down the line. Running backs, again, none of them stay healthy, so if you're a number 2 running back, you'll be a number 1 running back at some point during the season.
A couple names we haven't said at all. Christian Hackenberg, Cody Kessler, Pharaoh Cooper. So these aren't like necessarily the deepest draft picks, but they're not getting any love in like the fantasy community. I think down the road, a few years potentially, those are all names you want to keep in mind. Even Malcolm Mitchell.
Some receivers that I really like. I wanted to put them in my top 20, just ran out of spots. Moritz Boringer, one of the most fun stories from the draft. This guy's got the size and speed to be an elite receiver. What's going to happen? The first player ever drafted who didn't play college football here in the U.S., coming straight over from Germany. Definitely worth checking out his highlight film. I think he's got big potential. I've always had Treadwell high. I wouldn't be surprised if Moritz Boringer is the better of those two long term in terms of fantasy value.
Bold prediction!
Trevor Davis went to Green Bay. He's got good speed. They always seem to take guys with good measurables in every draft at receiver. And those guys, because Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, a rookie receiver always has some point during a Green Bay Packers season that he's on the outside consideration of ownership and even starting in fantasy. And then Colby Listensby also went to TCU. He's got great speed, better speed, in fact, than Josh Doxson. I liked him better than Doxson in a lot of ways. The 192 overall pick, so not the highest rated guy, obviously.
And with that, I forgot Trevor Davis existed, so probably gone deep enough.
All right.